Music is an extremely powerful communicator. It is a channel for advocacy and an agent of change. When it comes to shaping the conversations of our generation, music plays an undeniably influential role. It portrays strong messages, breaks down social and racial barriers, and provides a platform for creative expression for all of these important ideas. The key political issues raised in this song are that there are opposing narratives surrounding the settlement of Australia by Europeans. The settlers came into a land inhabited by other humans and proceeded to make their mark as a civilization with what is viewed as a gross disregard of the Indigenous inhabitants and their customs. Our First Peoples' views of the 26th of January are very different to the descendants of the European explorers and settlers that landed here this day. The song January 26 by AB Original and Dan Sultan sparked newly invigorated conversations between Indigenous and white Australia and continues to pave the way for future generations to pursue these generational struggles for equality and recognition of Australia's Indigenous history and the involvement of them in the story of white settlement in Australia. This lyric addresses the blatant degradation of sacred sites, unfair constitutional rights and second-class citizen treatment. The impact of these cultural crimes and the divide it has created within society is more evident than ever, with growing recognition being expressed in all forms of popular culture, especially music. All Australians are calling out for change. Though descendants of Australians' European settlers have a strong patriotic view and pride for the achievements of these First Fleet pioneers, Australia's Indigenous population are continually reminded of the atrocities committed against them, as the other side of this story goes. The settlement of this land came at a massive cost to Australia's First Peoples population and their forced colonisation. The degradation of their sacred sites shows disrespect and has destroyed ancient remnants of their history. Our ancestors stole their children, repressed their right to practice rites of passage, and attempted to force them into an alien way of life. The impact of transgenerational trauma on Australia's Indigenous population has been recorded in history books and research papers. The government allowed them to start self-managing their own reserves only in 1984, after the Aboriginal Protection Act was amended. This verse refers to the double standard treatment and unfair constitutional rights. Though communities were being self-managed, meetings between Aboriginal elders and Australian government officials were being held, yet still controlled by the white government demands and agendas. Major issues being brought to light in this song, violence and suicide, were becoming more frequent, and concerns raised by elders were being deemed as cultural by the experts in government departments. Furthermore, it was reported in a study by Judy Atkinson that the consequences of past massacres and dislocations of generations of Indigenous Australians was contributing to the rise in antisocial behaviour within these communities. In 1996, the government-funded reserve Warrabinda had a population of approximately 1,500 forcibly removed, traumatised Indigenous outcasts that were being detained. Despite the fact that the elders in this institution were voicing their concern regarding growing incidences of violence, officials disregarded these concerns and used force and degradation of rights to dominate control of the Indigenous population. This verse brings to light the basic fundamental right that all humans should have the freedom to feel a sense of place and belonging in their own homeland. The denial of this and the dispossession of the original community's land, coupled with the denial of the right to practice their own customary law, has excluded our First People from this constitutional right. Policies and legislation passed by Australian government further excluded our First Peoples from participation by relocating them from tribal land to reserves and missions. This dislocation severed spiritual connections with which diminished their social and cultural practices. In addition to this, the Mabo Decision and Native Title Act of 1993, as reported by Aileen Morton Robinson, stated that Australia's Indigenous population must now provide proof in accordance to the white legal structure to their own native title, which contributed to further homelessness. This last lyric brings to light the decades of refusal of recognition by Australia's government to make a formal apology. In 2008, Kevin Rudd addressed the country to reflect on past mistreatment, pain and suffering of our Indigenous at the hands of white law enforcement and government policy, calling on all Australians to actively look towards a future where mutual respect and equality would shape Australia's future. Unfortunately, his reign in government was short-lived, and his successors have not seen fit to make this a priority. As stated in various studies, such as the one in the International Journal of Science, Australia has existed under sovereignty of Aboriginals for around 65,000 years. These tribes lived here according to their own common laws and customs. In September of 2017, a treaty was proposed seeking a commission to supervise an agreed process between First Nations and Australian government that will establish a First Nations voice in the Constitution and therefore invite structural reform for a fair and truthful relationship. Part of this structural reform is the proposal to change the date of Australia Day celebrations, because to our First People, it is not a time for celebration. For them, it represents the day that started a future of massacre, displacement and disrespect. The impact this song has had so far can be measured on a small scale by its inclusion in the national youth radio station Triple J's Hottest 100 of 2016, where it came in at number 17. It also won Best Song Award in the South Australian Music Awards, and the album Reclaim Australia, from which it was released, took out the J Award for Album of the Year in 2017, as well as winning several arias. In conclusion, racial and cultural nationalism is a relationship that should already exist within Australia, hence the call for a treaty to have the First Nations involved in the decision-making of Australia's future common laws. Cultural and political issues expressed within many art forms, such as Australia's first Indigenous theatre group Nindathana in Melbourne performing satirical skits, contemporary artists like Clifford Possum Japal Jarry's paintings, and of course the connection within thousands of songs posing similar views as AB Original's 26 January, are common throughout history. The overwhelming evidence recording conflicts of racial and national identity, along with the significant Australian historical events, is proof that music has a very deep connection within the expression of these ideas and beliefs in our culture.